Hey, listeners, one of the things we're going to do in addition to these headlines is we're going to give you an idea of what we're reading, which outlets we're looking at, what outlets we trust, because, I didn't know what to read years ago. I was just flailing New York Times, whatever I could find, and sometimes it was good, and then sometimes it was not really what I was looking for. So my first piece today comes from the National Interest, which is a great website and magazine, sometimes abbreviated to TNI. And the National Interest is really sort of a small c conservative. I know I'm a bit of a political liberal probably, but this is a small c conservative, maybe libertarian sort of outlet that really wants to focus on realism in U.S. foreign policy. By that they mean prudence, sober strategy, and weighing ends and means. So my article today is from Sam Heller, who's an excellent writer, who's also a fellow at the Beirut-based Century Foundation. And his article is called America in Search of an Un-Geneva for Syria. And the gist of this article, and I'm going to write a piece on this and probably be out next week, is that the United States has essentially committed itself to nation building in Syria. They're not going to say that because Trump ran on a non-nation building, kind of platform. But then again, so did George W. Bush. But what's happening is we've had the Secretary of State, we've had Secretary of Defense both come out and say, hey, the U.S. military is staying in Syria. One article said to counter Iran, and another one said until we get a suitable settlement at Geneva. Geneva, of course, is the peace talks trying to end the Syrian civil war. Well, that sounds great, except for one tiny problem. There has been zero, remember what I just said, zero positive movement on the Geneva talks. Assad isn't going anywhere. We may want him to step down. That may be our preferred solution. That may be Saudi Arabia's preferred solution. But the inconvenient fact is Assad has already won that civil war, essentially. He doesn't control the whole country yet, but he controls all the key centers, all the key cities, most of the key sort of highway infrastructure. And with his Russian backing and his Iranian backing, he's not going anywhere. And so if, as Secretary of State Tillerson says, we're going to stay on the ground until we get a suitable solution at the Geneva Conventions, I assume that means Assad agreeing to step down eventually. That's forever war, man. That is us signing up for another forever war. Now, we may want regime change in Syria. You and I would probably both agree, right, Henry, that, Bashar al-Assad is a douchebag.
Absolutely.
Like, there's just no denying it. You don't barrel bomb your people and maybe gas your people and not claim the title of, tyrant, bully, and basic piece of shit. But there's a lot of assholes running a lot of countries in this world, and the U.S. military is a finite resource. Let's do a quick review of the last three regime changes that the United States attempted. Exhibit A, Afghanistan. Yep, we're still there, folks. We're still there, and it's as violent as ever. Look at the bombings that are happening in Kabul with ambulances right now. That government is teetering on the verge of collapse. Exhibit B, Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom. An aptly titled, nice-sounding word, but the reality has been quagmire, the growth of ISIS, and there are still Americans in Iraq. And what are we now? 14 and a half years since the invasion. Actually, I believe it'll be 15 years in 2 months. That'll be a great anniversary to celebrate.
Yeah.
Exhibit C, in case you thought this was a Republican problem, no, it's not, because Exhibit C is Barack Obama's regime change in Libya. Libya is still in the midst of civil war. It has two governments which each claim that they are actually in charge of the country. And the chaos that ensued from the Libyan civil war has only made West Africa a more dangerous place. And oh, by the way, we might not be in West Africa were it not for the sort of spillover from Libya. So those are the last three regime changes we tried. Why in the world would we think that we are A, going to convince Bashar al-Assad to stand down, or B, that a long-term military occupation of Syria's northeast until he agrees to step down isn't a recipe for disaster? It is. It is a recipe for disaster. And I want to yell it from the rooftops and try to get someone to listen, because both parties, the mainstream of both parties, which as you remember, supported the war in Iraq, so they're tainted forever. But the Mitch McConnells and the Chuck Schumers of the world are not the people we can look to turn this thing around. They're just going to acquiesce with whatever the Trump administration or whatever follows the Trump administration comes up with. And that's the bottom line. There are so many pitfalls in Syria. Number one, we've got the United States Army and its Kurdish militias staring down the Russians along the Euphrates River. That's just waiting for some spark to catalyze a war. And that would be catastrophic. Then, to the northwest, we have the Turks. They just invaded Syria. Remember when that used to be a big story? Remember when a NATO ally invading a country we had soldiers in was a big story? No, not anymore. We're too busy worrying about tweets that the president does, notionally probably from the toilet, it seems like, at 2 a.m. Look, all I'm saying is not that the Kurds don't deserve our support. I think they are tragic people who deserve their own country. Not that I like Bashar al-Assad. I don't. But that there are too many pitfalls for a forever, perpetual U.S. occupation of Syria. And quite frankly, that's what I see in our future.
Well, with Jim Mattis announcing that we're essentially back into a new Cold War with Russia, it makes perfect fucking ironic sense that we would be staring them down there in Syria where we are. Because that's all that we're gonna. I mean, aside for worst case scenario was what you just described. Something soldiers on opposite lines of each other do something stupid happens and we start fighting. It's not impossible. It's very, very possible.
Absolutely.
But then secondary to that is we have the buildup. We have the new Cold War buildup, and so we're talking about missile defense. We're talking about armor because that's the only way we could possibly quote unquote counter the Russians is with armor. So it does. It's just endless quagmire. It just that's the new tune of the nation, folks. Endless fucking quagmire somewhere. If there isn't a quagmire, we're gonna create one.
And we'll find a way. It's the American way. We will find a way to fuck it up.
Yeah, it's just more of the expansion of the military-industrial complex. When you were talking about Libya, I was thinking just going over the whole Niger story so far. When I say Niger story, guys, I'm talking about 4 Special Forces troops that were killed there. But just like how all of that expanded down from Libya, and that there wasn't any consideration at the time by Obama about the fallout. Here's a guy who came in as president and accepted 2 wars, and then basically has from the presidential grave, so to speak, now started a 3rd because he didn't learn the lessons of the first 2.
Absolutely, and it's incredible because you're right. He ran on such a different platform. I think the guy is coarse and unsophisticated in his analysis, from what I can tell. But at least on the campaign trail, he seemed to promise something new in foreign policy.
Yes, he did. He did.
And I actually thought on a few of those issues, I'm not afraid to say, I thought he was onto something. Maybe our NATO allies should pull more of their weight. Maybe the Mideast is a big sinkhole. I mean, he had some ideas that made sense, in a rudimentary way, and yet he's playing by the same script that Hillary would have if she was president, and it's just really demoralizing.